Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Help 100 Schools. So excited to have you here today. It's a new year as we record this, and we're coming inspired. And we've got a fantastic guest for you here today who is really a testament to culture eats strategy for breakfast. And at a school, that's going to mean many different things to you depending on what your perspective is. And I don't want to put words in her mouth or thoughts into your head, but I know from your perspective, the the leadership, the culture, and the way that this plays out for your position and your school and to the benefit of the students plays very dramatic and significant roles. So as you wear your hat and from the varying perspectives, I want you to consider how you can crystallize this to the benefit of yourself, your career, your school, your students, and the entire ecosystem. So thank you so much for being here. Please enjoy. Welcome to Help 100 Schools. As a professional in education dedicated to expanding enrollment, you're already a fundamental part of this movement. We are here together to amplify the positive ripple effect that comes from advancing education. We're committed to keeping listeners inspired with timely lessons, valuable stories, and insights from brilliant minds and dedicated hosts. Our mission is a collective effort. Together, let's make a difference in spirit and in action to help 100 schools grow. Meredith Herrera, welcome to the show.
Hi, Carl. Thank you so much for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thank you for being here. And I hope that we primed the show well for everyone. I think that everyone's going to feel the impact. And so let's get right into it. Let's talk about the why behind what you do, the work that you do with school leadership and culture.
You bet. Yeah, sure. So right now, I guess just by way of introduction, I was a longtime senior administrator in schools and left schools about 5 years ago with no intention of starting a business. And while my like many leaders in schools, my roles evolved and grew and shifted over time. And more, as I was sort of climbing the proverbial ladder, I was moving further and further away from the day to day life of kids and really recognizing how much adults in these independent school spaces primarily needed support. My background is in counseling and human development. And so I left schools and I was getting a lot of just honestly, my friends at different schools knew I was kind of home trying to like watch Netflix and said, "Hey, we have this new dean of students. Can you work with them? Or we have this new group of department chairs and they just need a little bit of anchoring in some rules of the road for how they want to work with each other." And that evolved very organically and eventually became what I do now. I run a consulting and coaching business called Meredith Herrera Consulting. And the work that I do falls into two camps. I do a lot of one on one leadership coaching and group coaching, predominantly for historically marginalized leaders, but not exclusively. Anyone who sort of identifies as a mission driven leader is a great fit. And then I get asked to work with a lot of teams. And these could be teams that are sort of newly assembled and they need to come together with a core vision and strategy or values to really understand what are their strategic priorities. Or often it's teams that have had some rupture or have found it difficult to make progress towards their goals. So that's sort of what I do in a nutshell now. I get to look under the hood of schools across the country. It's so fun. I love the work that I do. So your question, what's my why? I believe, and I've always thought about this, that good leadership can transform an environment or it can really destroy it. And I still think this holds true that there's a bilateral relationship between children and adults in a school community. So if your kids aren't doing well, look at the adults. And if the adults aren't doing well, look at the students. And leadership really shapes, for better or for worse, how people move through the school day to day. So I started in this work because I was really fascinated by adolescence as a period in the lifespan, this liminal space between childhood and adulthood. And it's a funky time to enter a young person's life. But what drew me to the work that I do now is this human side of schools with the adults. And so many leaders in independent schools are transitioning into leadership with little leadership preparation. And we want to set them up for success, but we're not always thinking very strategically or from a systems level on how to do that. So my why is just creating these environments where leaders can feel reconnected to a sense of purpose. They're aligned with their values, they're aligned with the mission, and they feel confidence that they can execute. And they're able to toggle between sort of the day-to-day realities, the fires we have to put out as leaders, but we're not so consumed by those fires that we're not able to operate at a strategic level that builds healthy culture for everybody. So I think to do that, we need not more talented leaders. Most of who I know who are, educators are really talented, smart people. We need more supported leaders. So that's my why. I believe so deeply in the work. I benefited from wonderful support and wonderful resources throughout my career. And I think they were a huge difference maker for me.
Right. I hear layers of empathy and, frankly, muscle memory for the different perspectives of the constituents that you're serving too. So hats off. Thank you for the service. It's good to be pulled off the proverbial couch from Netflix periodically, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, now I watch any of my Netflix shows, Carl.
Well, I was just collecting dust over there.
It
How
really is. It's okay.
it is. Yeah, absolutely. All right, very good. Well, when you think about school culture and how it intersects with strategy, leadership, and enrollment, how would you frame that?
Hmm. Such a good question. They're so intertwined, right? I guess I would think about it as, I mean, I don't think there's one way to define it, but for me, school culture is really the heartbeat of a place. It's not just what we say we believe in, like that strategic planning session that you got everybody together in the start of the school year in August, right? That's not enough. It's actually what people experience every day, what students experience, what your head of school experiences, what your math chair experiences, what your facilities director experiences. That's culture. And culture is going to show up whether we like it or not. And so are we approaching culture formation with intention, where we're really trying to shape culture, or not? And so I think culture shows up in how people communicate with one another. What are our systems for how decisions get made? How conflict gets handled in an organization, whether people feel safe or comfortable bringing attention to disagreement, whether they can disagree, what kind of feedback loops do or do not exist in an organization. So a school can have really amazing strategy, I think, to your kind of tagline at the start of this episode of, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We can have really robust, sound strategy, but if we don't have culture, culture is what determines if we can actually execute the work. So, for example, we might have these four amazing strategic pillars of our new strategic plan that everyone really believes in. And if we're able to execute, will really transform the school environment in healthy, positive ways. But if the people involved in carrying out that mission are burned out, overtaxed, unclear on the direction, not given the time and space to execute the priorities, or maybe there's some low trust with some subset of that group, the best plan isn't going to land. So, and then I think, to your sort of how does that bleed out into other parts of the school? When we talk about enrollment, we talk about retention. I think I'm a big believer that families, when they come to open house, they can feel culture pretty quickly. The vibe at student admission events, or how students on that student panel describe their experience, how teachers show up for curriculum night. Do staff feel aligned and connected? Are leaders excited? So I think culture work is really this intentional, thoughtful practice of building constructive ways of being together and of operating, so we can be, not that we always agree, but that we can be rowing in the same direction. And that means we're going to have clearer norms, clearer expectations, more shared purpose, better ways of working through sticky, hard moments. And so I think it's the intersection to me is culture is what makes strategy possible.
I like it. And I really like that metaphor of the heartbeat,
Mm.
that the way that that plays out into the rhythms that set the energy, that kind of direct everything that you just described, is really helpful, and in a way that you can sort of feel and connect back. You can feel the culture of a place, the energy, the vibe, as you said. And are people stressed? How do they hold themselves? Like, for all of it, right? And how does that connect to that rhythm? Because it's not just a sprint that made their culture. It's the system that sets the whole pace and energy. So that's very interesting. And I'm not a culture expert, so I'm speculating and crystallizing from your words. So it was interesting.
But you are in the sense that you know it when you feel it. And I think so much of culture gets formed unintentionally often. It's when you enter a school, right? Probably a lot of us have when we were in schools have entered a school and you hear, "Oh, that's just how we do things here." Or that's the X way of doing something. Well, that's a culture moment. And that communicates, well, what if I disagree with that? Or what if I think that's a weird way of doing something? Is it can is I might is it okay to push back on that? So a lot of times culture is developed through, frankly, routine, habits and practices that we haven't taken down and looked at critically for 20 years. Classic example. When I became a dean of students, I entered into a space that had some welcome traditions for new ninth graders that were just bad. I mean, there's just no way around it. They were nothing about these traditions were student centered, but they were very beloved in the community. And they fit an independent school culture in like 1986, but not
Hmm.
in 2016, right? It hadn't evolved as culture, the zeitgeist had evolved. And it sent a message to ninth graders. These poor little ninth graders were, shaking in their boots. Nothing about this was positive. So culture happens often because things coalesce over time. And, human nature is such that we tend to find comfort in the familiar, even if it's not necessarily aligned to our contemporary vision for our schools.
Interesting. And for heads, enrollment leaders, the Marcom teams, what are some practical ways that schools can build healthier, more aligned cultures, especially when people don't always agree?
Yeah. Well, I kind of think you gave the answer in the question in some ways. I think first of all, it's really recognizing that alignment is not agreement. It's okay to not have agreement. In fact, probably even healthy. It's to me, alignment is about shared purpose. And Brene Brown has a phrase that I love and use all the time, that clear is kind. So we need to get clear on how we work together. And this is not sexy stuff. This is pretty pedestrian in some ways, but it's so important. So, do we have, for example, whether you're the head or the division director or the admission director, do you have shared norms for meetings? How do I know where the agenda is? When can I put things on it? Can I not put things on it? Decision making. When I'm in a meeting and we're talking about something, and I think we've all had the experience of being in a meeting and spending an hour talking about something and leaving the meeting wondering what the heck did we just decide and who's doing what? Are roles clarified? Is there decision making clarity? Who's the decider? Like, who owns the final call? Who are the informers? Like, who needs key context and dates, and who is part of our messenger to communicate that to the community? Are there folks that are influencers? Who needs to be consulted? Do we need to check in with the athletic department before we make this enormous change to our schedule? And who needs to be informed? How are we communicating this decision, and in what sequence and in what tone? So I think, when schools don't name those roles, there can be misalignment, there's side conversations, that's where gossip starts, people feel blindsided. In my experience, most folks who, when we think from a change management standpoint, people aren't necessarily resistant to change, they're resistant to being surprised. The resistance comes from feeling unprepared. So, what can leaders do? I think first and foremost, it's really important to build a culture of empathy. Senior leaders, I believe very strongly that they need to shadow each other, right? If I'm, let's see, let's say I'm the dean of faculty and I'm predominantly facing faculty in my day to day work. But I really should be spending some time shadowing the athletic director to understand the complexity of their role because I feel frustrated. Let's say I feel frustrated by how our division is asking kids to leave school earlier, and I'm getting a lot of complaints from my academic chairs about the hit it's causing in the classroom. Okay, it's easy for me to kind of just take the teacher side right there, but there's a complex organism. Schools are complex entities. And so I think one of the things that good leaders do is they really make it their business to understand the complexity that other leaders in the organization face. I think communication, so when we're talking about like marketing and comms, that's just such a potent tool to shape culture. You know, reflect the truth. Culture, like good strategic consistent communication really helps solidify and embed culture, and so that all of the constituents, external and internal, can really metabolize that. And I think, one thing I see a lot in schools when I work with teams, and I get it, I think I've been here many times myself. We want a culture of kind. We don't want a culture of nice. And when we operate from a culture of nice, or perhaps when we're more insecure as leaders, we tend to want to be liked. And so we want universal buy in. Well, a lot of times leaders have to make tough calls, and the call you have to make is going to please some set of constituents and displease another, right? There's no universe in which, say, a schedule change in a school is going to make everyone universally happy. If someone listening to that has had that happen, please tell me, because that's amazing.
Right.
So we may disagree, but can we commit to how we're going to operate with one another through that disagreement? How we're going to keep our eyes focused on the outcomes rather than on sort of the ways in which we might disagree. So if we have shared commitment, so I just want to sort of underscore that healthy cultures aren't absent of conflict. They have conflict. Healthy cultures don't eliminate conflict. That's okay. We don't need to be it's okay to not, I don't want us to be afraid of conflict, but healthy cultures regularly build muscle around navigating conflict constructively in ways that are mission aligned. And we get good at what we practice. So if we practice conflict avoidance, we're going to get good at that as an institution. If we practice systems thinking, good constructive dialogue, we'll get good at that as an institution. And we'll model that for everybody else.
That's great. Wow. Well, very helpful and interesting. What strike some one of the things that strikes me about multiple points that you're putting out there are the derivative roots and
Mhm.
fundamental columns for some of those concepts. So in one
Mhm.
episode, we don't have enough time to expand enough,
Yeah.
but I found it really interesting that what is clear is kind. Well, what makes something clear also has, it takes up some gray matter that has columns. That for me, I'm thinking
Yes.
like, well, what is it? It's direct, right? It's defined.
Mhm.
And so these, I can see why you do what you do, and how there's a need to go deeper. So this that was very interesting. If schools made meaningful progress in this space over the next, say, 5 to 10 years, what would you hope to see change?
Hmm. Last week, I think I had like 3 or 4 of these conversations with folks that were in schools, but really looking for an off ramp. Really good, talented educators that had been in schools for 20, 30 years that were feeling really, they were just done. They were really saturated. So I think what I'd love to see is more sustainable leadership in the future. and less institutional stress being carried by a handful of individuals in an institution. I think, independent schools are complex, like I said earlier, and they're not, we can't treat them the same way we did 20 years ago or 15 years ago, or frankly, even 10 years ago. And so I'd love to see schools really sort of regularly and often audit their sort of internal systems and practices to ask themselves, okay, do we have the institutional architecture to operate proactively, or are we always being sort of reactive? So there's a lot of crisis driven leadership going on right now, and you can't avoid that. Like, when there's a thing blowing up at your school, like that's what you have to attend to. But how can we seed more strategic steadiness and consistency so that more good educators stop leaving the profession and they feel more energized by the work and not so depleted? I work with a lot of leaders of color, a lot of neurodivergent leaders. And so for that group in particular, I'd love to see maybe some clearer pathways to advancement and maybe a little bit more expansive thinking about that. I'd love to see schools move, like, really start to embrace the positive role that feedback loops can play in building healthy culture. I think a lot of schools can be really reticent to give a lot of feedback, do a lot of evaluation work, and I understand why. And I think sometimes, like, if you do that stuff badly, it really can spoil the soup, so to speak. But we need to train leaders on these discrete skills: conflict resolution, giving and receiving feedback. So I'd love to see schools really take a little more seriously the support they give leaders, particularly new leaders, because a lot of us got promoted to leadership because we were hard workers, or because we had, people liked us, or because we were effective in that role in the classroom or in that role in athletics or facilities. But that's not the same thing as learning how to be a good leader, learning the skills of leadership. So I think creating more space for that. Yeah, I think we can continue to work on creating spaces where adults, and I mean, obviously students, I don't mean to forget them, but adults feel real belonging and enthusiasm. They're energized by what the school is doing and therefore committed and inspired by it and committed to doing the work.
Excellent. another another sort of pillar that keeps coming up seems like defining the rules of engagement to
Mhm.
enforce and reinforce these systems. Do you find that that has to get done a lot of in your work?
Constantly. Although I might not use the word enforce.
Right.
I might say encourage or cultivate, those kinds of words. Yeah, because good teams are going to disagree. And like I said earlier, complex decisions that need to happen in leadership teams, the head often is making decisions that are going to have material impact on personnel, on students, and there is good reason to make that decision, and it's going to upset people. Like, there's going to be a group of people that really get it, buy in, and there's going to be a group of people that really are pissed off. We just need to name that. And that can happen on a macro level or a micro level. And if we are not regularly and often talking about how we work with one another, I mean, it's really just organizational psychology. Then when we are navigating conflict, we're likely going to, like, we can navigate conflict in ways. It's like, for people listening, think of relationships you have in your life, whether personal or professional, and think about times where you've had to navigate conflict in those relationships. There are probably instances where you could say navigating that conflict created more distance in the relationship. And then there are other times where you could say navigating that conflict actually brought that relationship into greater closeness. Okay, so what's the difference? Probably the difference is in how both of you or one of you approach the conversation. Were the rules of the road? Did we have norms that we agreed on? Did we take breaks when we felt ourselves being activated? Were we methodical in how we responded, or did we react? So, lots of those kinds of things are topics that I talk about all the time, particularly with teams.
That's inspiring. I think that the idea of systemizing culture at a school is probably relatively new for most leaders. I think that
Hmm.
they probably consider what is their culture like, but I don't hear people talk much about actually systemizing that culture.
I think about it. That's interesting. I mean, I'm obviously talking about it all the time because that's what I get called to do a
Right.
lot. But it's sort of like if you ever played a team sport
Mhm.
and your coach, there's different kinds of coaches. And I don't mean to turn things into athletic metaphors, but I played a lot of team sports growing up. And I've had coaches that were really good at helping me improve my individual skill in said sport. And that's good. That helped me. I improved. But I've had coaches that maybe were less adept at that particular style of coaching, but were very skilled at helping the group of players collaborate and cooperate in ways that made for more effective outcomes. So they talked more about the group operational norms than sort of individual skill. And as a result, the team did better, right? And so it's not that different. And are we approaching things with intention? Are we responding or are we reacting? The biggest issue I run into is that leaders often, when I say stuff like this, they're like, of course, we want to be responsive and not reactive, Meredith, but we have no time, right? So we need to systematize that. And by that, I mean, we part of, in the same way that we create these sort of not so exciting things like how do we run agendas? How do we clarify decision making? What are our values as a team? What are our norms as a team? What is our core vision? What is our core purpose? This is like the kind of workshop I'll do with a team all the time and with leaders. We're also trying to get folks to, something I work a lot with leaders is on time management, time allocation. So managing competing priorities as a leader is like what you're going to have to do every single day you're in the school. There's tons of competing priorities. So, how do if I have a goal of being responsive and not reactive, what are the tools, the strategies, the systems that I need to build or follow to enable responsivity versus reactivity? So, yeah, it's just being really thoughtful and strategic.
That's great. Alrighty. Well, at this, we've already got sort of a jam-packed, full of insight episode here.
Love it.
But is there anything that you'd like to share before we sort of wrap up?
Okay, I've got this is my latest. This is the hill I'm dying on recently. Regularly and often evaluate job descriptions. So I'm shocked at how many leaders I work with who do not have job descriptions or their job description was something that like literally somebody pulled out of a dusty drawer from in the HR office that's 20 years out of date. So again, if clear is kind, right? I can't be effective as a leader or as a worker if I don't know what the expectations are. So if you lead other people, make sure their job descriptions match what they do or evolve and change accordingly. And same for you. If you're a leader and you have no idea what the scope of your responsibilities is and where things start and stop, it's going to be very hard to be successful because you don't know what sort of standard you're being measured against. And you're probably going to get really tired really fast because you're going to think you have to do all of the things equally with equal, ferocity. So job descriptions is one thing I'm really like it's a bee in my bonnet lately. I think making times for teams to come together to have culture retreats. So not necessarily retreats where we talk about all the work we need to get done, but like at the start of the year, we come up with our team core values. We come up with our team vision. We come up with our 3-month, 6-month, 9-month goals. We discuss how are we going to know if we've met those goals or not. We schedule in the calendar in August the 3, 6, 9-month check-ins because we all know that school calendars get gobbled up really fast. So that's something I would do. Do you have an agenda? I mean, I know this sounds really simple and straightforward, but every meeting needs an agenda. There needs to be, it shouldn't just be like a bunch of bullet points on a Google Doc. It needs to be I don't like to mess with people's time or money. And I think most of us have experienced being in meetings where we don't feel like that time has been used well. And school leaders are very busy people. So we want to make sure that as we work in those spaces, we're really making sure that we're using our time effectively and you're using organizational systems to promote that. And then the other thing I would say is build your network outside of your school. Obviously, coaching, I think one of the mistakes I see is that a lot of schools believe that they can support new leaders internally. And the head's going to mentor that person, the division director is going to mentor that person. Well, I don't know if I mean I suspect if I pulled some random head I know or division director and said, show me your calendar this week, there is zero white space in that calendar to do that kind of work. So it's really important that we encourage leaders. It's an investment when you're having it's expensive to run a search, a retained search for a high level position. So we want these folks to be successful long term. So I think invest in support at the institutional level. That can look like really meaningful professional development. That can look like coaching, particularly at mid-tier leadership. There's a lot of coaching available for heads, but and this might not be the most popular opinion, I think it's really important to invest in those future heads that are now academic deans, deans of students, division directors. Those folks really, really need that support. And I think self-care matters. And when I say self-care, I don't just mean I mean authentic self-care, trauma-informed self-care. So building time in your calendar to take a beat. If you haven't eaten, if for the last 4 months you've only eaten lunch at your desk while answering emails, while kids are also in your office, that's a sign that you probably need to take a little bit of a beat. And that's the kind of work I help leaders with. They often feel like they can't afford to. That's a line I hear a lot. And so we really talk about whether or not that's real or true. It might feel real, but it's probably not true. So those are some quick tips.
Very helpful and smooth in that even I was thinking, gosh, I'd like to bring Meredith in to help me with some of these things. So I think
We
it's a
all,
good.
I mean, I have a coach. I mean, we we need the support, I think. If I'm entering into a tricky let's say I have to do work with a team that I know has had a lot of historic conflict. I've worked with teams where literally those three people haven't talked to each other in 15 years, and yet their desks are right next to each other. Right? That's gnarly to step into that
It
space.
really is.
So, okay, I can mine all of my experience and wisdom to come up with, say, a retreat agenda that I think is going to best move this group forward and in ways that they've identified they want to move forward. But I am absolutely going to leverage my network. I'm going to talk to, my former head of school and say, who's got all of this wisdom and experience. And I'm going to talk to my coach and I'm going to, to say, this is what I'm thinking. Tear it up. Give me feedback because I want to show up in that space as prepared as possible. And when something goes awry, because we can't prepare for everything. And let's say there's some big rupture live in color in that moment when I'm trying to facilitate this group of people. I want to feel confident that I will be able to navigate that ambiguity. And the way that I have built and the way that leaders build that confidence is to get a lot of reps in, to be open to taking smart risks, to leverage the wisdom of other people in their network, and to practice, practice, practice.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think that's a good note to close out on. So if somebody is listening and they'd like to connect or learn more about your work and reach you, where should they go?
Yeah. Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, Meredith Herrera, Herrera. My website is mherreraconsulting.com. They can email me at meredith at mhedconsulting.com. And I'd love to chat with folks.
Perfect. And we'll absolutely be linking all of those items in the show notes at Help 100 Schools. And with that, Meredith, thank you so much for being on the show. Look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks, Carl. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and chat. It's really been fun.
It really has. It's my pleasure. Perfect. We are grateful for your support of the Help 100 Schools movement. Thank you for listening and for showing up. Now, please help us multiply the impact by reviewing, sharing, commenting, and staying engaged with us and our mission to help 100 schools grow. The future of education is in your hands. To learn more about today's topics, how to be more involved, and how to access our free resources designed to aid in your own mission, go to help100schools.com.